IVM.
Who are the real guardians of Pakistan's national interest? How is the public morale in Pakistan today? Who's going to come into power next? Hello, you're listening to the Pragati podcast and I'm your host, Hamsini Hariharan. Each Thursday, my co-host Pawan Srinath and I get together to discuss policy, politics and economics. Now, in every conversation about foreign policy in this country, we inevitably land up at the topic of Pakistan. Since the Doklam crisis and the decision of the Pakistani Supreme Court to disqualify Nawaz Sharif, relations between India and Pakistan have taken up only a little mind space. This week on the show, we have possibly one of the best voices speaking on Pakistan, Ambassador TCA Raghavan. He's the former High Commissioner of India to Singapore and Pakistan. His first book, Attendant Lords, covered about 100 years of the Mughal court. His new book, The People Next Door, is an anecdotal chronicle of India's strange and often obsessive relationship with its neighbour. I managed to catch up with him at the Bangalore Lit Fest to discuss our current relations with Pakistan.
Well, the current situation between India and Pakistan is at a plateau. And that, of course, is well known. And it's also not particularly new, because these ups and downs in India-Pakistan relations have been there right from the very beginning. And the current plateau is, broadly speaking, on account of two factors. One is what has happened in terms of terrorist attacks in India, which obviously acts as a dampener to any initiatives which the government of India may wish to take. But the second and more critical factor, to my view, is the internal situation in Pakistan. And now it is very clear, especially with the benefit of hindsight, that since late 2014, Pakistan has been in the midst of a very intense civil-military tussle. And the imbalance in the civil-military equation has affected virtually all its external relationships with Iran, with Afghanistan, with the United States, with Saudi Arabia to some extent, but most of all with India. The only power which has to some extent insulated itself from the civil-military tussle is China. So that is the current situation as we find ourselves in. And I think till some amount of domestic stability is restored in Pakistan, which may happen in the course of the next 8-9 months, what form that stability will take is difficult to say. But in the next 8-9 months, some form of a new balance may emerge. And then possibly we will see further developments taking place.
Speaking of the current situation in Pakistan, there was what was called a judicial coup in a sense. And the military again has control over the state. What do you think? How do you think this will play out after Nawaz Sharif stepping down between the military and the civilian government?
Well, this is the $64 million question. And everyone in Pakistan is asking it, trying to analyze it, looking for answers. It's very difficult to say, because it is very much of an ongoing contest, and it's difficult to predict what is going to happen. Certain things are clear, that the Pakistan military has a position in its society and polity which is not going to change very quickly. So it will remain part of whatever balance emerges. But there are also new factors in Pakistan, and this is the new thing which has emerged in the last 10 to 15 years, that the situation in Pakistan is no longer possible for the military to control on its own. And it needs to have alliances outside, with political parties, with the judiciary, with other stakeholders, and so on. So what cocktail will emerge out of this current churning is really the question. To my mind, the balance started shifting against then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, sometime around late 2014. And it was broadly correlated with the very major steps the Pakistan military took against terrorists in Pakistan. And in so doing, it gained a great deal of public support and goodwill, and that tilted the balance against the civilian authorities.
The analysis of Pakistan often suggests that the military will override any decision that the civilian government takes. Back in July, Hussein Haqqani said that Nawaz Sharif fell out of the army's favor when he decided to assert himself in the conduct of foreign and national security policy after he became prime minister. So hardliners often ask how any new civilian government will change that equation.
I don't think the question is as simple as the military will ensure that no matter who comes to power, relations with India remain at a low ebb. I think the situation, to my mind, is far more complex than that. And it has to do with the quality of the relationship between the civilian authorities and the military. Now, that relationship started deteriorating under Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif when he began the process of taking the former President, General Musharraf, to trial. And that really disturbed the equation with the military, and that had a number of other consequences, ending finally with his unseating in what you called a judicial coup. So the quality of the relationship between the political party in power and the military is very important. If that relationship is smooth, if it is harmonious, and there's no reason to believe it cannot be, if that relationship is smooth and harmonious, perhaps things will look up for the India-Pakistan front too. If that relationship remains disturbed, prone to suspicion and distrust on each sides, then the India-Pakistan equation will not see that much improvement.
It's funny how there's a direct correlation between India-Pakistan relations as well as the civil-military relations within Pakistan itself.
Well, that correlation has been there for a very long time. And the reasons for that are quite complex, but also simple enough in other ways. The Pakistani military sees itself as the guardian of Pakistani interests vis-a-vis India. So therefore, if someone wants to move forward on relations with India, it must have a good relationship with the military. Otherwise, it will not be able to bring it on board. If that relationship is disturbed, then progress on India-Pakistan relations becomes that much more difficult.
While civil-military relations are important for India, they're also important for Pakistan's other neighbour, China. How does this equation affect Pakistan's relationship with China, which is only growing warmer every day? I asked this to Dr. Raghavan, and this is what he said.
I think it affects the relationship with China to a lesser extent because the Chinese are seen as a benign external power. And you must understand, most Pakistanis see themselves confronting India, which is 6 times its population, 10 times its GDP, and 10 times its military budget. So they feel it is natural that they have to bring in an external power to balance the Indian presence.
And that's how it's always been.
And that's how it's always been. From the 50s to the 90s, that external power was the United States. And now with the rise of the Chinese economy, it is China. So to that extent, China is seen as a more benign player. They have also no major disputes of relating to identity or territory, unlike in the case of Afghanistan and India. So to that extent, it remains insulated from the ups and downs of daily politics. But at the same time, if conditions in Pakistan deteriorate further, if there is more political instability, if there is a breakdown in civil-military equations even further, or to a greater extent than is anticipated now, then the consensus around China will also weaken. Let's not forget, at the time when there appeared to be a near breakdown in civil-military equations in Pakistan in 2014, when Imran Khan was leading this major agitation against Nawaz Sharif, the military appeared to be equivocating, at least people thought it was equivocating between the two. One of the casualties was the Chinese president's visit to Pakistan had to be cancelled. And you had the odd situation of the Chinese president coming to India but being unable to visit Pakistan. So it shows as to how, notwithstanding this very strong domestic consensus, that consensus nevertheless remains a function of internal stability.
You also spoke about just mentioned the US. So with the US Secretary of State visiting India and then Pakistan, how do you think the US is playing a role or will play the role under its current president with respect to affairs in the Indian subcontinent?
Well, the current administration represents a line of thinking which has been there in the United States for a long time, of great cynicism and impatience with Pakistan. And especially the sense that Pakistan duplicity has played us, and we've had enough of it. Now, this sentiment is not totally novel. It was there in earlier administrations too, but in President Trump's administration, it has acquired almost a preponderant weight, and that explains the kind of language he used in his against Pakistan when he announced his new AFPAC policy, and during developments during recent Secretary Tillerson's visit, that they are very keen that Pakistan takes substantive and tangible steps. To achieve that, they are putting a great deal of pressure. Again, it is anyone's guess how this pressure will work. To an extent, the Pakistanis will try to accommodate US interests. I think their public rhetoric on this, which is very charged and very defiant, is quite different from the private message or the internal message which they are giving to the United States, that they are going to try to accommodate your concerns to the extent we can, because many people in Pakistan, notwithstanding the relationship with China, put a great deal of value to bilateral relations with the United States. So we are going to try to see the Pakistanis try to accommodate US concerns in the hope that this will increase their leverage with the administration they otherwise know very little about and don't have the kind of links they had in the past. While doing so, they will try to insulate their what they feel are their core interests. So it's a good question, if you put it very bluntly. To what extent will there be a trade-off between what is happening in Afghanistan and what is going to happen vis-a-vis India? Now, the answer to that is still very much in the future.
After talking about the largest powers in the world, I became curious about the smallest unit of any state, the individual. As Indian citizens, we have little to no contact with the people in Pakistan. Since Ambassador Raghavan stayed in Islamabad for many years, I wondered how it was to actually live in the country.
Well, I've stayed in Pakistan in two separate stints. The first was for about 4.5 years between 2003 and the middle of 2007. And the second more recently from 2013 till 2015. So roughly 7 years split in two different halves, or near halves. Both in the earlier stint and in this stint, I did feel that at the ground level, anti-India feelings are not of a quality or of intensity as they were described in the past, in the 70s and 80s. And many factors have contributed to it. Most of all, the great disillusionment with the state of Pakistan itself. And that has, to my mind, tempered the intensity of anti-India sentiment. It's still there, but not as visible as it used to be. The second big change which I noticed, especially when I went back to Pakistan in 2013, was the loss of public morale because of events in Pakistan from 2007 onwards. The assassination of Benazir Bhutto, the major terrorist strikes affecting the whole of Pakistan, and the deterioration in the economy. I think this lack of public morale was a very important factor in the election of Nawaz Sharif to power. But in spite of what people may have expected, it continued even during his tenure as Prime Minister. And it changed only in 2015 after the Pakistan military started taking action against homegrown terrorists carrying out attacks in Pakistan. And that was a big change because you saw public confidence returning and returning very quickly. In the space of 6 months, people were coming out more in the streets. There was more public activity in terms of literary activity, artistic activity, cultural activity of a kind which had gone into a lull earlier. So that was a change which struck me as being very significant.
And I guess we'll have to see now how public confidence lies after the current events in Pakistan.
Well, I think public confidence is at a low. The Pakistanis may put up a good front to it, But I believe the US pressure, the terrible state of relations with Afghanistan, with Iran to some extent, not to the same extent, but with Iran certainly, and especially with India, all this dampens public mood, not just in a subjective sense, but also acts as a dampener to economic confidence, business confidence. And underlying all this is the very poor external image Pakistan enjoys, or Pakistan has externally, internationally. And that poor international image has an all-pervasive effect on different aspects or different areas which concern the Pakistani elite. This is therefore, to be a upper-class Pakistani, this is a very difficult time.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being on the show.
Thank you for calling me. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Pragati podcast. You can read a review of The Attendant Lords on the bookshelf at thinkpragati.com and buy The People Next Door from any bookstore. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can tweet them to Pawan or me. Pawan is on Twitter as @ZeusIsDead and my handle is @HamsiniH. You can listen to the Pragati podcast on the IVM podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, on thinkpragati.com. We'll be back next week.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out IVM Podcasts to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.